In the previous lecture, we talked about quantitative psychometric psychological tests. In this lecture, we will talk about more qualitative measures of personality. The reason why we have qualitative tests is that we believe that many qualitative phenomena cannot be measured. I'll give you an example. We talked about tests of depression earlier, in which we actually convert depression, which is a very, very qualitative phenomena, into a number. And that number is then manipulated as if it was a real thing. Many psychologists claim that in this process, we lose the essence of depression. Another example could be given where we are looking at how strongly you feel about something. Psychologists have prepared tests of attitudes. So they would say, what is your attitude towards Coca-Cola versus Pepsi? And they would give it numbers and measure quantitative differences. Whereas in a qualitative test, people would be given these two drinks without the labels in paper cups, and they would be asked to say which one they prefer and why. So whenever we ask why, whenever we ask what, we're doing qualitative assessment rather than quantitative measurement. So let's say you have a food item and you want to know how much people like it. Quantitative way would be to ask people to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the most delicious and 1 is the most tasteless or a bad, really, really bad tasting food item. Whereas qualitative assessment would require that we talk to the person. We say, well, did you like this particular food item? And if they say yes, we would say, well, would you say it is one of your most favorite things? And they might say, well, I like X dish much better than this, but it does taste better than Y or Z item. And then we ask them, what was so special about this that you liked it so much? And we get more information out of it. There is another version of qualitative assessment which is called a projective test. In a projective test, we ask the subject to do something, typically to write something or to draw something or to talk about something. And then we make judgments about their personality or their attitude or their interest. So one example is the Rorschach ink blot test. In Rorschach ink blot test, as it is being shown in the diagrams here, a German psychologist by the name of Rorschach put some ink drops onto absorbent paper. What would happen was that the ink blot would then spread over that absorbent paper. And if you folded that paper, it would produce a symmetrical figure that typically looks like a bat. And then Rorschach added different inks to it and different styles to it to produce 10 standardized pictures. These pictures are still in use, and it's called the Rorschach ink blot test. People are asked, what do you see in this picture? A very large number of people have been asked this question, and norms have been developed for each picture card. So for instance, the first card, when it is shown to the subject is likely to respond, I see a bat. And when you ask them, where do you see the bat? They would tell you that this whole picture is that of a bat. What if the person says, I see a murder, and I see that there is a dead body lying here and a man has just run away from the crime scene? The psychologist would get very, very concerned, and rightly. So the projective tests sometimes may have a normal response like that of seeing a bat. There is no limit to the kind of responses an individual might reply with. The responses are not controlled as they are in quantitative scales or measures of personality. Another very popular test is called thematic apperception test, or TAT for short, in which a certain number of pictures are shown to the subject and the subject is asked to write a story. An example is being shown right now. You can look at this picture and maybe you can write your own story about this picture. Usually the dominant themes in that individual's personality, their dominant traits of personality can be derived or deduced from the kinds of stories they tell. There are many different procedures that are followed In fact, many different theoretical orientations can use the same test. I have personally used a version that I had developed of this test, thematic perception test, that is, for corporate recruitment. So a business wanted to know if their employees had desirable traits such as positive emotion, such as high emotional intelligence, such as creativity, such as integrity. So when I showed job candidates these pictures, they were expected to write a 200-word story. And the different aspects of their stories pointed to whether or not these people had integrity, whether or not these people were creative, whether or not these people had positive emotion, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, projective tests are a form of qualitative assessment. And qualitative assessment can be of many different kinds. Another good thing about qualitative assessment is that it can allow us to zero in on individual situations. So for instance, when I work with somebody in my clinic, a depression scale might be useful. But what is much more important is that individual's own story. So the individual tells me that they were abused as a child, beaten up a lot by both parents. They tell me that they failed in the metric exam. They tell me that later on, when they were working as an employee, there was a boss who humiliated them. And then they tell me that they get flashbacks and they get bouts of depression. And they also experience a lot of difficulty talking to strangers or participating in public events. Now, this is a very different scenario and is a very unique scenario. One person's depression is not the same as another person's depression. And that is why qualitative assessment gives me, the psychologist, a lot more information that the quantitative measure would give me. And that is the reason why quantitative measures are used a lot more in research. So if I want to know if these 1,000 people have depression, I would use a depression test. But if I want to know if the person sitting before me has depression, I would prefer to use a more informal, a more personal way of interaction. So you can see both kinds of instruments have their strengths and weaknesses, and both are needed depending on the situation.